Hey folks, James here. I wanted to take a minute and say thank you for listening. It really means a lot to me. And if you like what you hear, then please consider sharing this with someone, a friend, a loved one, coworker, anybody. And keep an eye out. 2015 is going to be a very big year for looking back. So once again, thank you for listening. I appreciate it. And mahala. Oh dear sweet baby Jesus, what the fuck is going on? Freaks. What's going on, you guys? This episode of the podcast is brought to you by first Amazon.com. If there's something you want to buy from Amazon and you want to help the podcast out as well, here's what you do. You go to lookingbackpodcast.weebly.com. Link is in the description as well as all the others. Click the Amazon banner on the front page, and out of whatever you buy, Amazon kicks back a little bit of coinage to the podcast, and it would really, really help us out. There's also a PayPal donate button if you wish to donate directly to the podcast. That would be awesome as well. No obligation at all, but if you wish to, the option's there as well. Also, we're brought to you by NatureBox.com. NatureBox is a fantastic company, and this right here that is that is some great stuff right there. Toasted sesame sticks. There's some really cool, really great snacks there. Stuff's all natural. There's no fake bullshit. There's no high fructose corn syrup. There's no added fats, added sugars. It's just all natural, all good stuff. So, also, before my brain went dum dum, there's a special deal for you guys. If you go to naturebox.com, use the coupon code that's in the description below, you'll save $10 off your first box. It's a really great deal. I'm very happy to be using NatureBox. I'm happy to be sponsored by NatureBox. And with that, thanks for listening. And here we go. Buckle up, bitches. Start the show.
There goes the neighborhood.
Oh dear sweet baby Jesus, what the fuck is going on? Welcome to another episode of Looking Back. We are continuing our look back at the rise of Rome. Dun, dun, dun. Dun, 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 dun. We're going to get into the political history of Rome. And if you haven't listened to the previous episodes, please do, so you have kind of a better understanding of what we're talking about. You don't have to right away. Just the option is there for you guys. When this series is over, there will be a playlist for you guys to make it a lot easier to listen to the shows. Anyway, enough jibber jabber. Here we go. The constitutional or the political history of Rome and the Roman Republic, especially, is divided into 5 phases. The first began with the revolution that overthrew the monarchy in 509 BC. The final phase ended with the transition that transformed the Republic into what would be the Roman Empire in 27 BC. Throughout the history of the Republic, the evolution was driven by the conflict of the orders between the aristocracy and ordinary citizens. The last king of the Roman kingdom was a man named Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, and he was overthrown in 509 BC by a group of noblemen led by Lucius Junius Brutus. Tarquin made a number of attempts to retake the throne, including the Tarquinian conspiracy, the war with Veii and Tarquini, and finally the war between Rome and Clusium, all of which failed to achieve Tarquin's goals and his objectives. The most important change during the transition from kingdom to republic concerned the chief magistrate. Before the revolution, a king could be elected by the senators for a life term. Now, 2 consuls were elected by the citizens for an annual term. Each would check his colleague, and their limited term in office would open them up to prosecution if they abused the powers of their office. Consular political powers, when exercised conjointly with a consular colleague, were no different from those of the old king. In 494 BC, the city was at war with 2 neighboring tribes. The plebeian soldiers refused to march against the enemy, and instead seceded to Aventine Hill. They demanded the right to elect their own officials, and the patricians agreed, and the plebeians returned to the battlefield. The plebeians called these new officials plebeian tribunes. The tribunes would have 2 assistants, called the plebeian aediles. And from 475 BC to 471, the Republic experienced a constitutional crisis during which the tribunes used their vetoes to protect the election of senior magistrates. In 367 BC, a law was passed which required the election of at least 1 plebeian each year. In 443 BC, the censorship was created, and in 366 BC, the praetorship was created. Also in 366, the aedileship was created, and shortly after the founding of the Republic, the Comitia Centuria, or the Assembly of the Centuries, became the principal legislative assembly. In this assembly, magistrates were elected and laws were passed, and during the 5th century, a series of reforms were passed. The result of those reforms was that any law passed by the plebeian council would have the full force of law. So this gave the tribunes, who presided over the plebeian council, a positive character for the first time. Before these laws were passed, the only power that the tribunes held was that of the veto. In the conflict of the orders, after the plebeian aedileship was created, the patricians created a curo aedileship. After the consulship had been opened to the plebeians, they were able to hold both the dictatorship and the censorship. The plebeian council of 342 BC placed limits on political offices. An individual could hold only one office at a time, and 10 years must elapse between the end of his official term and his re-election. Further laws attempted to relieve the burden of debt from plebeians by banning interest on loans. In 337 BC, the first plebeian praetor was elected, and during these years, the tribunes and the senators grew increasingly close. The Senate realized the need to use plebeian councils and officials to accomplish desired goals. To win over the tribunes, the senators gave them a great deal of power, and the tribunes began to feel obligated to the Senate. As the tribunes and senators grew closer, plebeian senators were often able to secure the tribunate for members of their own family. In time, the tribunate became a stepping stone to a higher office. Around the middle of the 4th century BC, the plebeian council enacted what was known now as the Ovinian Law. During the early republic, only consuls could appoint new senators. The Ovinian Law, however, gave this power to the censors. It also required the censor to appoint any newly elected magistrate to the Senate. By this point, plebeians were already holding a significant number of magisterial offices, so the number of plebeian senators probably increased very quickly. However, it remained difficult for a plebeian to enter the Senate if he was not from a well-known political family, as a new patrician-like plebeian aristocracy emerged. The old nobility existed through the force of law, because only patricians were allowed to stand for high office. The new nobility existed due to the organization of society. As such, only a revolution could overthrow this new structure. By 287 BC, the economic condition of the average plebeian had become poor. The problem appears to have been centered around widespread indebtedness. The plebeians demanded relief, but the senators refused to address their situation, so the result was the final plebeian secession. They seceded to the Janiculum Hill, and to the end of secession, a dictator was appointed, and this dictator passed a law known as the Hortensian Law, which ended the requirement that patrician senators must agree before any bill could be considered by the plebeian council. This was not the first law to require that an act of the plebeian council have the full force of law. It acquired this power during a modification to the original Valerian law in 449 BC. The significance of this law was in the fact that it robbed the patricians of their final weapon over the plebeians. The result was that control over the state fell not onto the shoulders of voters, but to the new plebeian nobility. They had finally achieved political equality with the patricians. However, the plight of the average plebeian had not changed. A small number of plebeian families achieved the same standing that the old aristocratic patrician families had always had. But the new plebeian aristocrats became uninterested in the plight of the average plebeian. The plebeians rebelled by leaving Rome and refusing to return until they had more rights. The patricians then noticed how much they needed the plebeians and accepted their terms, so the plebeians then returned to Rome and continued their work. On the next episode, we will get into the supremacy of the new nobility. We'll talk about the Hortensian Law and the deprivation of the patricians. We will also talk about the supremacy of the nobility from Gracchi to Caesar, and then maybe get into some of the better known conspiracies, I guess, between Pompey and Crassus and Pompey the Great. So some really interesting stuff coming up. Definitely keep an eye open for that. That will be available tomorrow night. Same YouTube time, I guess. Same YouTube channel, obviously. And thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot to me. If you like what you have heard, thumbs up, subscribe, favorite, like, do all that good fun stuff. And until next time, take care of yourself and each other. See you tomorrow night.
That's the end of my show. Donk.
Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go home. Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go home. I hate to leave you, but I really